Racist cop pulls over black woman, unaware she is a US colonel. Welcome to today's riveting tale, a story packed with drama, tension, and a truly unexpected turn of events. In this narrative, we follow a seemingly straightforward traffic stop gone terribly wrong, one fueled by prejudice, but destined for a dramatic, karmic finale. Our protagonist, a woman traveling on a routine trip, encounters a cop who wields racial bias as a weapon. Unbeknownst to him, she's far more than he assumes. What unfolds is a whirlwind of accusations, revelations, and moments of sheer danger that keep everyone on edge. Prepare to dive into a gripping account where wrongdoers face what they deserve, heroism prevails, and shocking truths emerge from the most unlikely of places. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. A sliver of silver moonlight pierced the early morning darkness on Interstate 85, illuminating the slick highway near Greenville, South Carolina. The hum of engines filled the air as a handful of vehicles cruised along, each driver lost in their own world. Among them was Lieutenant Colonel Geneva Jenny Wilson, a distinguished member of the United States Army, heading back from a strategy conference at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Her black Toyota Camry gleamed beneath the sparse streetlights, unwavering in its path toward her mother's house, where a belated family reunion awaited. Despite the exhaustion lingering behind her eyes from nearly 10 hours of driving, she remained alert. Years of military service had sharpened her senses to a near preternatural degree. Geneva's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. She had recently learned that a close friend in her battalion was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. The details weighed heavily on her heart, but she still felt an indefatigable sense of responsibility, not just to her friend, but to her family who had waited ages for her visit. For a moment, she allowed herself a deep breath, reminding herself that she would soon be able to hug her mother and enjoy a home-cooked meal. Little did she know that seemingly endless stretch of interstate held a far more harrowing fate than highway hypnosis. Not far behind her, a black and white Chevrolet Tahoe from the local sheriff's office lurked. Inside it sat Officer Bradley Thompson, a man carrying a thick knot of resentment and anger in his gut, a bitterness that had festered for years. On this particular night, his target became any driver he deemed an easy mark. Through narrowed eyes, he watched Geneva's car, the silhouette of its driver obscured by darkness. He jotted down her license plate number before activating his lights. In a flash of red and blue, the chessboard of destiny was set. Officer Thompson was the kind of man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, always scrutinizing, perpetually seeking to prove a sense of superiority. He had grown up in a small South Carolina town with an old-fashioned father who instilled in him a twisted sense of entitlement. Although Thompson had a record of complaints for rough conduct and alleged racial profiling, the local department overlooked them, often citing his passion for the job. This passion, in reality, was a seething intolerance. To some, it was an open secret, to others, a hushed rumor. Yet, whenever confronted, the station's culture of denial or nepotism intervened. That night, Thompson's usual discontent brewed into something more volatile. He had received an enraging phone call from his estranged wife, who demanded child support. Meanwhile, his sergeant had scolded him for missing paperwork deadlines. Already fuming, Thompson craved an outlet for his frustration. The moment he spotted Geneva's Camry, he latched onto it, an unfamiliar vehicle that, in his mind, was a prospective culprit. Maybe it was going a bit over the speed limit, or maybe it simply stood out among the other cars. It didn't matter. He had decided she was worth stopping. He hit the gas, accelerating to tail her closely. Once he confirmed the out-of-state plates, his sense of justification grew. People from out of state always bring trouble, he muttered to himself, recalling with twisted satisfaction how this line of thinking had led him to countless petty infractions he'd pinned on unsuspecting drivers. As the Tahoe roared up behind Geneva, Thompson turned on his siren, certain he was about to add another unfortunate soul to his tally of citable offences. Unbeknownst to him, his assumptions were about to collide headfirst with a reality he never anticipated. Geneva sensed the flashing lights before she saw them, that familiar glare permeating her rearview mirror. With disciplined calm, she signaled and guided her Camry to the road's shoulder. Her heart raced not out of guilt. She was an exemplary driver, but from the understanding that traffic stops could be unpredictable, especially for a black woman. Still, her training took over. She kept both hands visible on the steering wheel and breathed steadily, focusing on keeping her composure. The hum of passing cars whizzed by her window, a stark reminder of how vulnerable she was in that moment. As Thompson strutted over, boots crunching against gravel, he appeared more menacing than authoritative. Tapping aggressively on her window with a flashlight, he motioned for her to lower it. Geneva complied, letting the damp night air swirl into the car. The officer's face was partially hidden by the brim of his cap, but she could sense the hostility emanating from him like heat waves off summer asphalt. "License and registration," Thompson demanded. No greeting, no polite explanation for why he'd stopped her, just raw antagonism. Geneva suppressed her rising discomfort and calmly reached for the documents in her glove compartment, making sure to keep her movements slow and deliberate. Meanwhile, Thompson's gaze flicked around the interior of her car, as if searching for something incriminating. She handed over the documents, but he refused to glance at them. Instead, he glared. "Were you headed this late?" he asked, voice dripping suspicion. In that moment, a fleeting thought of revealing her military status flitted through Geneva's mind. But years of dealing with prejudice told her not to flash any credentials unless absolutely necessary. The more silent she remained, the quicker he might lose interest. She answered only with a respectful firmness, telling him she was on her way to visit family. Thompson eyed her driver's license like it might turn to ash in his hands. "You got any idea how fast you were going?" he sneered. Geneva blinked, taken aback. She had set her cruise control to maintain the speed limit precisely. Still, she answered politely, "I believe I was within the limit, officer." Her tone was collected, carefully measured. His eyebrows shot up. "You believe? Well, your belief is wrong. I clocked you doing 75 in a 65. He spat the words out as though he'd caught her red-handed in some unforgivable crime. A lie, of course, but it gave him the pretext to escalate the situation. "Now, step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Geneva felt that first twinge of real fear. An inner voice recalled all those horrifying stories of routine traffic stops spiraling out of control. Her background in the army had shown her real-world threats, yet this moment felt deeply personal, precisely because it was so small, so mundane, and so laced with prejudice. Nevertheless, her unwavering composure remained. She had served in Afghanistan, diffused life-threatening conflicts, negotiated with foreign officers. She could handle one overly aggressive cop. She slowly opened her door, carefully placing one foot on the asphalt. The chill in the night air contrasted with the heat of Thompson's glare. Once fully outside, she saw how tense and rigid his posture was. A gust of wind whipped past, making the leaves on a nearby tree rustle like anxious spectators. Thompson barked, "Hands on the hood, where I can see them." She complied, placing her hands on the hood of the Camry, feeling the lingering warmth of the engine beneath her palms. At that moment, the first seeds of an explosive confrontation had been planted. High above them, the moon broke from the clouds, illuminating the bizarre tableau, a decorated U.S. Army colonel pinned in place by an unhinged cop's unwarranted demands. As Officer Thompson pulled out a small flashlight to examine the interior of her car, Geneva felt her heart pound. She expected him to start rummaging, maybe try to find something he could use against her. The trunk, the back seat, she braced herself for the intrusion. But an odd flicker of confusion crossed his face. He hadn't actually run her plates yet, only jotted them down. His usual pattern was to intimidate first, gather incriminating details, then call in the plate number and driver's license for a standard check. Paradoxically, it was as though he thrived on that moment of psychological pressure before revealing who he'd stopped. If she dared to question him, he'd hold the power of official procedure over her. The sudden crackle of his radio interrupted the tense silence. "Dispatch to car 412, do you copy?" The dispatcher's voice emerged, shrill and tinny. Thompson hesitated, his annoyance clear on his face, and pressed the talk button on his shoulder mic. "Car 412 copy. Busy at the moment. Need you for a priority call, urgent domestic disturbance off Highway 14, the dispatcher said, an edge of concern in her tone. Thompson scowled. He glanced back at Geneva, who remained quietly leaning against her car's hood, waiting. She could overhear bits of the conversation. Any rational officer might have let her go, responding to a real emergency. But not Thompson. He waved a dismissive hand at the radio and said, "I'll handle that after I'm done here." Frustration evident, he cut the connection. Geneva knew these few seconds could set the tone for the rest of the encounter. If Thompson had the nerve to ignore a priority call for a simple traffic stop, it meant he was determined to push this further. In her gut, she sensed she should prepare for the worst. A swirl of adrenaline electrified her senses. The next move was his, and the consequences would be unpredictable. Without another word, Thompson circled around to where she stood. The rancor in his eyes was palpable. He reached out and abruptly grabbed her wrist, twisting her arm behind her back. "Let's see if you're carrying anything dangerous," he muttered, using unnecessary force. An excruciating twinge of pain shot through Geneva's shoulder. Every fiber of her military training told her to remain calm, not to resist, to let him dig his own grave with his misconduct. She forced her body to stay limp, her mind racing back to the day she received her commission as an officer. The oath she took to defend the Constitution, protect citizens, and uphold values that ensure freedom for all, even in the face of internal threats. This was a stark, heartbreaking example of the injustice that often rotted those same values from within. Her emotional turmoil collided with her fierce sense of discipline. She would not let this overzealous cop provoke her into a compromising position. Nevertheless, as Thompson proceeded to pat her down, she felt a humiliating sense of violation. She'd served in forward operating bases overseas, led squads under fire, and earned medals for valor. Now, she was being treated like a common criminal by a man who didn't have the faintest idea who he was manhandling. The bitterness of it clung to her, but she clutched her composure tightly, refusing to let him see the quiver of rage in her eyes. Finally, Thompson finished his rough search, seemingly disappointed that he hadn't found anything suspicious. He released her arm, only slightly, enough to glare down at her. "Think you're special or something?" he asked, venom staining his words. "Driving this fancy car, out of state plates, doing what you please." Geneva just stayed silent, blinking back the sting of tears that formed, not from fear, but from pent-up frustration. If he wanted a reaction, he would have to work harder for it. An unnerving silence descended, broken only by the passing cars. Thompson finally snatched Geneva's license and headed back to the cruiser. This was the moment he'd punch in her information, read the details of her identity, and perhaps realize the monumental mistake he was making. Geneva heard the distant murmur of the radio as he called in her driver's license number. Heart pounding, she dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd read the note on her record identifying her high-level security clearance or her official military rank. Time stretched. Thompson seemed to take longer than usual. She tried to peer at him through the rear windshield of the Tahoe, but all she could see was the glare of the dashboard lights. With each second that ticked by, the tension tightened like a drawn wire. Overhead, the sky darkened again, clouds drifting across the moon's pale face. The highway felt like its own world, where a single confrontation could change the course of two lives in a split second. At last, Thompson slammed the cruiser door and stalked back toward her. The expression on his face gave nothing away, but to Geneva's astonishment, he simply said, "License is valid, but we got a problem." His tone was dangerous in its quietness. "Your registration is expired." Geneva's breath caught in her throat. That was impossible. She'd renewed it online and had the receipt. She started to speak up, but Thompson cut her off. "Don't care what you say. The system is telling me it's expired." A triumphant sneer tugged at his lips. Geneva's mind whirled. Could it be a system glitch, a data entry error, or was he simply lying again, forging another excuse to escalate? Before she could form a response, he slapped his palm onto the roof of her Camry. "I'm impounding this vehicle right now." Her jaw tightened, and she fought to keep her voice level. "Officer, there must be some mistake," but Thompson was already motioning for a tow truck on his radio, ignoring the dispatcher's repeated urging for him to respond to a more urgent call. The die was cast. The question was how far he intended to take this ruse. The air felt charged, as though an approaching thunderstorm lurked at the edge of the horizon. Geneva stood by the side of the highway, hands trembling in carefully contained anger. She glanced at her watch. It was almost 1:00 a.m. She'd hoped to arrive at her mother's place by midnight, but that dream was rapidly disintegrating. Adding to her troubles, she had a suitcase of personal items in the trunk, gifts for her mother, specialized equipment from the army, and an array of important documents. If Thompson towed her car, who knew what havoc he might inflict upon her belongings? Thompson switched off the Tahoe's flashing lights for a moment, stepping closer to Geneva. "You got anywhere you can stay the night?" he sneered, voice heavy with mock concern. "We'll be dragging your little ride over to Greer's Towing. Might take a while before you can get it back if everything checks out." The bold arrogance of his words made Geneva's blood boil, yet she retained her calm. "I can arrange a ride," she said, her tone clipped but polite. In the back of her mind, she wondered if she should mention her rank. Would it even matter to someone like him? Over years of service, she'd seen prejudice in many forms, and often revealing her rank earned her grudging respect. But something about Thompson's behavior indicated that any revelation might inflame rather than diffuse the situation. He seemed to hate that she wasn't cowering or pleading like other drivers he might have intimidated. Confronting him with her colonel status might provoke something far more dangerous. When headlights appeared in the distance, Geneva could see a large tow truck lumbering toward them. Thompson allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. She thought about the next steps: call the base, request official support, or contact a friend who was closer. But this was also needless, so infuriating. She glanced at Thompson and realized with sudden clarity that he was the type of individual who fed off fear and compliance. The only question was how far he would push, and how dire the consequences might become before the night was over. The tow truck operator, a man in his late 50s wearing a faded baseball cap, stepped out and surveyed the scene. His name patch read Dennis. He offered a polite nod toward Geneva before turning to Thompson. "Evening, officer. Heard you got a car to impound?" Thompson scowled and gestured toward Geneva's Camry, not bothering to hide his smugness. Dennis gave a slight shrug and set about hooking up the front wheels. All the while, Thompson busied himself with paperwork, deliberately ignoring Geneva's presence as if she were a nonentity. She walked to the trunk and calmly opened it, needing to retrieve her personal belongings before the car was taken away. But in a flash, Thompson jerked around, hand flying to his holster. "What do you think you're doing?" he roared. Geneva's heart thundered in her chest. "I'm just getting my suitcase and valuables," she said slowly, forcibly keeping her tone measured. Thompson's eyes flicked to the open trunk, scanning for contraband or weapons. "You ask for permission before you make any moves," he said through gritted teeth. "Am I understood?" A wave of indignation crashed within her, but she kept it contained. Nodding, she carefully lifted out her suitcase while Thompson hovered close, hand still near his gun. Dennis looked uneasy, sensing the tension. For a moment, he met Geneva's gaze, and there was a flicker of sympathy there. She offered him a small, grateful smile. When she had her suitcase in hand, Thompson stepped back, and she shut the trunk. As Dennis finished securing the Camry to the tow truck, the night air felt suffocating. With her car soon gone, Geneva would be stranded. Where would she go at this hour, on this deserted stretch of highway? Before she could put together a plan, Thompson spoke again. "I'll give you a ride to the station. You can figure out what to do from there." His tone was far from friendly, but with no other obvious options, Geneva reluctantly agreed. She climbed into the back seat of his cruiser, the door slamming behind her like a prison cell. Unbeknownst to both, fate was about to spin events far beyond their control. The interior of the police Tahoe smelled faintly of vinyl and old coffee. Geneva felt a chill creep up her spine as she settled into the hard plastic back seat. A mesh partition separated her from Thompson, who gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles paled. This was not the way she envisioned the night going, far from it. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket, but she hesitated to pick it up. She could almost predict how Thompson would react. Instead, she glanced out the window as the tow truck roared away with her Camry in tow. A hollow sense of dread settled in her stomach. The highway was quieter now, traffic thinning in the early morning hours, leaving them isolated in a corridor of flickering streetlights. Thompson pulled away from the shoulder, merging back onto the interstate. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the engine's hum and the faint crackle of the police radio. Suddenly, the dispatcher's voice broke through. "Car 412, domestic disturbance on Highway 14 is escalating. Advise your eater." Geneva watched Thompson's face in the rearview mirror, anticipating his response. If he'd ignored the earlier priority call, would he still do so now? He barked into the radio, "I'm busy with a detainee. I'll be at the station soon." No mention of heading toward the domestic disturbance. Geneva's eyes narrowed. Was the detainee him referencing her? Under normal circumstances, a driver detained for an expired registration, one that she was sure wasn't actually expired, would hardly trump an active emergency. The uneasy feeling in her chest deepened. Then, as if to compound the tension, a thunderous pop echoed from somewhere ahead on the interstate. Thompson slowed the Tahoe, scanning the road. Bright orange flames appeared on the right shoulder. A pickup truck had collided with the guardrail, bursting into a small blaze. Geneva caught a glimpse of two figures struggling to free themselves from the twisted vehicle. Every nerve in her body jolted into action. She'd seen car crashes before, had training in emergency response. She was about to call out to Thompson, urging him to help those in danger, but he cursed under his breath and kept driving. He actually accelerated, swerving around the wreck without so much as a pause. Geneva's heart pounded in horror. That was the moment her perspective of him sank even lower. Rage ignited in Geneva's veins at the sight of the flaming wreckage receding in the rearview mirror. "Officer, those people need help," she said sharply, unable to suppress her indignation any longer. "You're sworn to protect and serve." Thompson barely glanced back, a sneer plastered across his face. "I have priorities," he replied, spitting out each word like venom. "I've got a suspect in custody, and I'm taking you to the station." She couldn't believe it. Two individuals were potentially trapped in a burning truck, and he was just leaving them there. Every fiber of her moral code screamed to intervene, but she was locked in the back seat, powerless to physically force him to stop. Her pulse hammered with a mix of helpless fury and a sense of moral imperative that was being flagrantly ignored. Despite her predicament, Geneva reached for her phone, ignoring the potential backlash. She dialed 911, hoping that dispatch might still be listening, or that they could reroute emergency services. Thompson realized what she was doing, but by the time he demanded she put the phone down, it was too late. The call was already connected, and she reported the location and nature of the crash in calm, precise language. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Geneva Wilson of the USARMY. There's a pickup on fire near mile marker 27 on I-85. 2 people possibly inside. Immediate rescue needed." Thompson slammed on the brakes for a split second, turning in his seat, face contorted with anger. "Who do you think you are?" he barked. Geneva locked eyes with him, unwavering. "Someone who won't stand by while civilians burn alive." In that moment, she thought she saw confusion flicker behind his fury, perhaps. He was only just registering the significance of her words. Maybe the mention of Lieutenant Colonel had finally landed. Nevertheless, he snapped, "End that call now," and accelerated once more. Geneva's call ended abruptly, but she was sure dispatch had enough information to send rescue. Adrenaline coursed through her. What unnerved her most wasn't just his brazen disregard for duty, but the realization that Thompson was crossing lines she hadn't even imagined an officer would cross. There was no telling how much further he'd go, or what he would do once they reached the station. They continued in tense silence for another 15 minutes, passing exits shrouded in darkness. At last, Thompson steered off the interstate onto a vacant 2-lane road lined with tall pine trees. Geneva's brows furrowed. The station she knew of was located in a busier part of town. Why would he exit here, on such a deserted route? Her gaze flicked to the glowing digits of the Tahoe's dashboard clock. It was now well after 1:00 a.m. She could hardly see anything outside beyond the faint shapes of trees and the glint of farmland gates. Fear and suspicion twisted in her gut. Was he taking a back route, or was this not the route to the station at all? "Why are we going this way?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. Thompson gave a malicious chuckle. "Construction on the main road," he lied. She knew he was lying. Just earlier that day, she had traveled a similar route and hadn't encountered any significant construction blocks. This only confirmed her worst suspicions. He was isolating her further. As the Tahoe rumbled on, an unsettling heaviness permeated the air. Geneva realized that letting him drag her deeper into unfamiliar territory was dangerous. Summoning the calm from her countless training sessions, she cleared her throat. "Officer, I am Lieutenant Colonel Geneva Wilson of the USARMY. You are violating my rights by withholding me from legal processing and ignoring life-threatening emergencies. I advise you to reconsider your actions immediately." Thompson's face twitched, that flicker of confusion resurfacing. He had not connected the dots until now, evidently. Maybe he assumed she was bluffing. "Don't try to scare me with your bogus titles," he sneered. The twisting road led them even further away from city lights, and she felt her heart pounding in her ears. The entire scene was teetering on a knife's edge, and she had to figure out how to turn the tables if she wanted to make it out unscathed. The flicker of phone reception bars on her screen was fading. Geneva made a snap decision. She used what signal remained to send a brief text to one of her trusted colleagues. Major Samantha Ward at Fort Bragg. The text was simple and cryptic, containing GPS coordinates and the words "pulled over, possible danger, no due process need, immediate help." She doubted it would send in time, but every second counted. Just as she hit send, Thompson glanced in the rear-view mirror. He must have seen the phone's glow on her face. "Hey!" he barked, swerving slightly on the narrow road as he tried to snatch the device through the partition. "Give me that phone." Despite the partition, he managed to reach over and yank it from her hand. Geneva's stomach dropped. "That's government property, officer." Her tone was clipped, but she couldn't hide the edge of panic. Thompson smirked, scanning the screen to see if there was anything incriminating. He frowned at the screen's locked interface. "Worthless," he muttered, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The tires crunched over gravel as they approached a small clearing, and Geneva spotted a crude wooden sign reading Old Pine Ridge Estate. No other buildings or vehicles were in sight, just a wide-open field and a dilapidated barn. Thompson pulled over and killed the engine. "Out," he ordered, stepping out of the Tahoe himself and opening her door. Her pulse hammered. Every instinct screamed that she was in grave danger. She considered her training in close combat, but forcibly attacking a police officer, even a corrupt one, carried dire risks. As she stepped out, he loomed closer, one hand resting ominously on his holster. "Now, Colonel," he said mockingly, dragging out the word like a twisted joke, "we're going to have a little chat about respect and the law." The hush of the surrounding pines gave the moment a surreal edge, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Geneva stood tall, refusing to cower, adrenaline rushing through her veins. She would not let him break her spirit, but she desperately needed a plan before things spiraled past the point of no return. A faint breeze rustled the pines overhead as the two stood face to face under the moon's sullen glow. Thompson's posture reeked of hostility. He towered over her, his hand near his gun, as if daring her to make the wrong move. The eerie stillness was disturbed only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Geneva's mind raced, evaluating her surroundings for any potential advantage. "I don't know what game you're playing, officer," she began cautiously, "but this isn't how due process works. You're taking me off the grid against proper police procedure." "Shut up," Thompson snapped, stepping closer. She caught the pungent odor of stale coffee on his breath. "You think I'm some rookie you can fool? I've seen your type before, big talk, fancy titles, waltzing around like you own the place." He seemed on the verge of a violent outburst, the tension in his posture coiling like a spring. Geneva took a measured breath, scanning the area for anything that might help her. The barn was about 50 yards away, its door half open, revealing stacked hay bales in silhouette. No sign of farm equipment or any easy means of escape. She was alone, armed only with her training, facing a man with a gun and a badge who was clearly unhinged. She had to stall him, maybe reason with him, though it seemed a long shot. "Officer, I am not a threat. I'm unarmed. I've cooperated with every request. Let's go to the station. Let the system handle this. You have nothing to gain by in a flash." He grabbed her by the arm, forcibly spinning her around. Pain lanced through her shoulder as he twisted her arm behind her back for the second time that night. "I'll show you gain," he hissed, pushing her forward. Her boots scraped against loose gravel, and a primal jolt of fear coursed through her. She clenched her jaw. She'd been in life-threatening situations before, but not like this, not in her own country, faced by someone sworn to protect. Whatever flicker of restraint Thompson had was evaporating like fog under the morning sun. He marched her toward the barn with grim determination, footsteps crunching the earth. A single horrifying thought ricocheted in her mind. If they went inside that barn, there might be no coming out. Geneva resisted, forcing her steps to slow, trying to break his rhythm. But Thompson tightened his grip until her arm felt like it might snap. She suppressed a scream, not wanting to fuel his sadistic satisfaction. Step by step, they drew closer to the barn. The structure loomed in the moonlight, boards creaking in the faint breeze as if whispering a warning. When they reached the threshold, Thompson slammed her against the doorframe, forcing her face to the weathered wood. Splinters bit into her cheek, and he pinned her there with an elbow pressed against her upper back. "You think you can mouth off to me, call yourself a colonel, and get away with it?" His voice quivered with unrestrained fury. "I'll show you what happens to liars around here." A wave of panic crashed over her. She knew she had to do something. Now, summoning every scrap of mental discipline, Geneva shifted her stance and used a maneuver she'd learned in hand-to-hand combat training. She let her body go limp for a fraction of a second, causing him to lose balance, then pivoted her hips to break his hold. It was risky. If he pulled the trigger, it'd be over. Her calculated move paid off. Thompson stumbled, releasing her arm. Geneva spun around, breath ragged, eyes aflame with resolve. "I'm not lying," she snapped, controlling her posture to appear as calm and authoritative as she could, while adrenaline blasted through her veins. "I am a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, and if you harm me, you'll regret it." Thompson's eyes flared. For an instant, he seemed truly stunned by her sudden shift in control. But as quickly as that glimmer of surprise appeared, it twisted into unhinged anger. He yanked his gun from its holster, leveling it at her chest. The barn door creaked ominously, a grotesque stage for a showdown that should never have happened. Geneva froze, arms half raised in a gesture of surrender. If he fired now, it'd all be over. The haunting thought flashed through her mind. She had survived wars abroad, only to be executed on home soil by a man who wore a uniform meant to protect her. The muzzle of Thompson's firearm gleamed under the pale moonlight, a lethal void aimed squarely at Geneva's heart. Her pulse beat so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. Time seemed to slow, every breath measured, every rustle of the trees amplified. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, the tension in his arm. In that razor-thin instant, Geneva called on a final piece of her training, reading the stance, reading the eyes of a person poised to kill. She knew there was no chance to outrun a bullet, no time to physically disarm him without risking a fatal shot. So she spoke with a calm, authoritative voice that belied the terror she felt inside. "If you pull that trigger, you'll be court-martialed by the army and tried for murder. There are records of my rank, communications I've already sent out. You will not walk away from this." "Is that how you want your story to end, Officer Thompson?" Her words hung in the night air. She hoped to jar him with the prospect of real consequences, to crack the delusional bubble of invincibility he seemed to be living in. He wavered, his breath ragged. Then, unbelievably, he let out a bark of scornful laughter, though it was tinged with uncertainty. "You must think I'm some idiot, buying all this colonel nonsense," he hissed, but his arm trembled slightly. "I'm doing the world a favor getting rid of scum like..." Before he could finish, a sudden blaze of headlights illuminated the barn entrance. The roar of an engine thundered in the clearing. Thompson, startled, pivoted the gun in that direction, partially lowering it from Geneva's chest. She seized the opportunity to scramble backward, putting a few precious feet between them. A black SUV skidded to a halt, and the driver's door flew open. To her utter shock, Major Samantha Ward hopped out, wearing civilian clothes, but armed with the authority of her position and accompanied by 2 local deputies from a different jurisdiction. They had grim expressions and were clearly on high alert. The cavalry, it seemed, had arrived. The glare of the SUV's headlights formed an otherworldly halo around Major Ward and the deputies as they advanced. One deputy shouted, "Put your weapon down, now!" The tension in the air crackled, thick as a thundercloud about to burst. Thompson spun around, eyes wide, momentarily disoriented. He still held the gun in his hand, knuckles white, but the sudden intrusion eroded his sense of control. Major Ward, regal even in plain clothes, stepped forward with measured caution. "Bradley Thompson," she called in a tone that brooked no argument, "drop your weapon and step away from the colonel. This is your final warning." Geneva's heart soared at the sight of her friend, but fear still prickled her skin. Thompson's mind was a tinderbox, one spark of indignation, and he might start shooting. For a moment, he seemed caught between fight and flight, his gaze ricocheting between Geneva, the new arrivals, and the deep woods behind the barn. Then, in a move that sent everyone's nerves screaming, he raised the gun, pointing it wildly toward Ward and the deputies. A deputy immediately squeezed off a warning shot into the ground. The echo reverberated through the clearing, rattling the barn's old timbers. Thompson flinched, his face slackening with shock. "Don't be stupid, man," shouted one of the deputies, voice strained. "There's no way out of this." With the gun trembling in his grip, Thompson looked cornered. Geneva held her breath, ready to hit the dirt at any moment. But the last shred of self-preservation must have flickered in Thompson's mind. He realized the scales were drastically tipped. Slowly, his arm drifted downward, and the gun slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the gravel. The sound was a collective exhalation of tension. Major Ward rushed forward, kicking the weapon away before cuffing Thompson with practiced efficiency. The second deputy stood nearby, firearm still drawn, eyes scanning for any further threat. Geneva sank to her knees, adrenaline crashing, her limbs quivering with delayed shock. The night's malevolence had finally cracked open, revealing a path back to sanity. Moments later, Geneva felt Major Ward's supportive arm around her shoulder. Her friend offered a small, comforting squeeze as she guided her away from the barn. "Are you okay?" Samantha asked, voice low with concern. Geneva nodded shakily, absorbing the reality of her near-death experience. "Thanks to you," she managed to say, swallowing hard. How did you know where to find me?" Ward's eyes flicked toward the imprisoned Officer Thompson as the deputies patted him down and recited his Miranda rights. "Your text reached me, but it was garbled. I only got partial coordinates. I notified the local authorities, and we triangulated your location the best we could. Then I recognized your route from your earlier check-in at Fort Bragg. I had a gut feeling you might be taken off the main roads." The crisp night air filled Geneva's lungs as she tried to reorient her senses. She glimpsed the radio on one of the deputies' shoulders, squawking about the earlier domestic disturbance and the fiery crash. It hit her, countless calls and crises that Thompson had deliberately ignored in his obsession to intimidate her. A wave of relief flooded her, followed swiftly by a surge of anger. She'd nearly lost her life in this remote clearing because of one man's prejudice and abuse of power. Major Ward gently guided her to the back of the SUV, where she could sit and catch her breath. Meanwhile, Thompson was corralled near his own cruiser, which ironically now displayed the bright glare of its police lights, painting him in accusatory red and blue. In the swirl of chaos, Geneva could barely make out what one of the deputies was saying into his radio, but the words possible kidnapping, assault, and charges pending drifted to her ears. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the enormity of it all sink in. She could almost hear the echo of her father's words from her childhood. There will be battles to fight at home, too. He had meant it metaphorically, but tonight's events underscored a tragic, literal truth. At least, for now, she was safe, and justice seemed poised to take its rightful course. Within the hour, the quiet clearing was alight with swirling police lights from multiple units. A county sheriff's SUV had arrived, along with another vehicle from the state troopers. The once deserted back road was now bustling with uniformed officers, collecting statements, snapping photographs of the barn, and meticulously documenting the scene. The hushed solemnity of the pines gave way to the mechanical chatter of radios and the murmur of official proceedings. Geneva refused medical attention at first, insisting she was fine aside from a bruised shoulder and a few scrapes. But a kindly paramedic who had arrived insisted on checking her vitals, so she relented. Her mind raced with the surreal nature of it all, a simple drive home transformed into a life-or-death standoff. Thompson sat in another cruiser, cuffed and seething, occasionally yelling protests of innocence or conspiracies. His outbursts fell on unsympathetic ears. No one seemed inclined to listen, especially after hearing the initial evidence and the recorded dispatch logs that showed how he had bypassed urgent calls. More damning still was the fact that local authorities had discovered that Geneva's registration was indeed up to date, and all Thompson's claims of expired documents were lies or data tampering. Major Ward stood by Geneva's side throughout the questioning, providing moral support as she recounted the harrowing experience to investigators. Despite the trembling in her limbs, Geneva spoke with a clear, commanding tone. She documented every detail, how he fabricated traffic violations, manhandled her, confiscated her car, and forced her to ride with him before taking her to that remote location. Bit by bit, the puzzle of Thompson's misconduct came to light. He had a documented history of complaints, each brushed aside by a complacent department. This time, however, he had gone too far, crossing into unarguably criminal behavior. As the hours wore on, the weight of official justice started bearing down on him like a slow-moving but unstoppable freight train. Meanwhile, Geneva finally let herself exhale when a trooper informed her that her Camry was located at a local impound lot, safe and sound, waiting to be released. She closed her eyes, relief washing over her like a balm. Despite the bruises and the trauma, she was alive, and a sense of gratitude mingled with her underlying rage. Shortly before dawn, the crisp edge of morning light began to paint the horizon. Geneva found herself in the station's lobby, sipping lukewarm coffee offered by a sympathetic officer. She stared at the drab walls and flickering fluorescent lights, feeling the night's events crash over her in waves of exhaustion and disbelief. Major Ward sat beside her, checking messages on her phone, presumably updating command at Fort Bragg on the situation. Eventually, the sheriff approached them, his expression grave. He introduced himself as Sheriff Raymond Hall, a seasoned lawman with weathered lines etched into his face. "Colonel Wilson, Major Ward," he greeted in a quiet voice. "First, I want to extend my apologies for what happened tonight under one of our own's watch." He paused, struggling to find the right words. Bradley Thompson had been flagged before, but he was protected by an internal structure that allowed him too much leeway. "I promise you, we will leave no stone unturned with this investigation." Geneva simply nodded. Her shoulder ached, but not as much as the thought that this was hardly an isolated incident in the grand scheme of systemic injustices. She looked the sheriff in the eye. "I understand, and I appreciate your candor, but I hope you recognize the gravity here. He nearly took my life. He left civilians in danger. The reports, the logs, there's going to be a lot to account for." Hall's gaze flicked downward. "You have my word," he said, voice filled with sincerity. He then offered to help expedite the release of her vehicle and any personal property that Thompson had confiscated. "As for you, Major Ward," he continued, "I'm grateful you responded. Without your intervention, I hesitate to imagine what might have happened." Major Ward responded with a cool nod. "I'm just glad I got the partial coordinates in time. Colonel Wilson is not only a colleague, but a friend. I wasn't about to let any threat go unchecked." The sheriff excused himself, leaving them to wait a while longer. In the corridor, Geneva could hear the faint shuffle of feet, the buzz of paperwork being processed. The entire station seemed subdued, perhaps shaken by the betrayal in their midst. She finished her coffee with a determined gulp. There was still a sense of anger burning within her, a need for closure that only accountability and justice could truly provide. Finally, after a labyrinth of paperwork and statements, Geneva was allowed to retrieve her car from the impound lot. Dawn had fully broken, painting the eastern sky with streaks of pale gold and lavender. Major Ward drove her over, and together they found the Camry parked behind a chain-link fence. A tired attendant lifted the gate, apologizing profusely for the inconvenience. Geneva thanked him with polite courtesy, too drained to dwell on the irony. As she opened the driver's door, her suitcase and personal items remained intact, though rummaged through in a careless search. She felt a pang of relief. "At least nothing's missing," she murmured, rifling quickly to confirm. Next, she carefully placed her army duffel in the trunk, double-checking that her official documents related to the Fort Bragg conference were undamaged. Major Ward leaned against the Camry's side, arms folded. "What's your plan now, Colonel? You still heading to your mother's place?" Her voice carried a gentle note of concern. Geneva paused, glancing at the time on her phone, nearly 7:00 a.m. "I promised her I'd come," she said, squaring her shoulders. "And after everything that happened, I think seeing family is exactly what I need." Ward gave a nod of approval. "I'll follow you for a bit, just to ensure you don't run into any more trouble." Geneva appreciated the gesture more than she could express. A strong bond had formed between them during multiple missions overseas, and it warmed her heart to feel that camaraderie extending into this personal crisis. As they rolled out of the lot, the morning traffic inched along, and the sun climbed higher. Geneva couldn't shake the images of that terrifying standoff from her mind. Yet with each mile she put between herself and that station, she felt a morsel of reassurance. Justice would catch up with Thompson. She had lived to fight another day. And best of all, she was on her way to see her mother, carrying the ultimate proof that not even the darkest corners of prejudice could silence her resilience. The highway into her hometown was lined with familiar landmarks, an old diner she'd visited as a kid, the public library's red brick facade. Geneva felt a pang of nostalgia, mingled with residual trepidation. Even though the immediate threat was over, her muscles remained tense, as if anticipating another ambush. Major Ward's SUV followed close behind, a comforting presence in her rearview mirror. When at last she pulled into her mother's driveway, the sight of the modest, ranch-style house filled her with indescribable relief. She stepped out of the car just as her mother, Elaine Wilson, emerged from the front door. Elaine's eyes widened the instant she noticed the bruises on her daughter's arms and the weariness in her posture. Without a word, they embraced, holding each other for a long moment under the bright morning sun. Ward parked on the curb, stepping out to give them space. Geneva eventually pulled back, offering a tired smile. "I'm okay, Mom. It's been a rough night." Elaine's worried gaze shifted from her daughter to the approaching Major Ward. "And who might you be?" she asked politely. "Major Samantha Ward, ma'am," came the gentle reply, accompanied by a respectful handshake. "Geneva and I served together. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Elaine exhaled, ushering both of them into the house. "Well, come inside. You must be exhausted. I'll make some fresh coffee, and you can tell me what happened if you feel up to it." As they crossed the threshold, Geneva felt an overwhelming sense of warmth and security that she hadn't felt all night. The living room still had the same floral couch she remembered from childhood, and the walls were adorned with framed pictures of family gatherings and her father's old military portrait. She found her own reflection in one of them, tall, in uniform, flanked by her proud parents on her promotion day. Now, standing in the protective haven of her family home, she reflected on how close she'd come to losing it all. Her mother's gentle chatter about coffee and pastries felt like a balm, pulling her back into the realm of normalcy. She glanced at Major Ward, feeling gratitude and relief in equal measure. The horror of the night was behind them, but she knew a new journey lay ahead, one that would involve legal battles, departmental inquiries, and a public reckoning for the man who nearly ended her life. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, interwoven with the warmth of sunbeams streaming through lace curtains. Geneva and Ward sat at the round oak table, while Elaine busied herself preparing a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. The homey normalcy contrasted starkly with the night's horrors, providing a soft landing for their frayed nerves. As they ate, Geneva recounted the events in more detail. Elaine's face went pale, tears threatening to spill as she listened to her daughter's brush with death. She clutched Geneva's hand in silent anguish, occasionally casting a grateful glance toward Major Ward for intervening. When the story concluded, Elaine's voice trembled. "I'm so thankful you're here, safe. I can't believe something like that could happen so close to home." Geneva forced a reassuring smile. "I'll be okay, Mum. I just need some rest and time." She shot a grateful look at Ward, who nodded in agreement. "I'll head back to Fort Bragg this afternoon," Ward said softly. "There's going to be a mountain of paperwork, statements, you name it, but right now we just want to ensure Geneva is settled." Elaine wiped away a tear, squeezing her daughter's hand gently. "You rest as long as you need. I'll call the local paper, my friend works there. We're not sweeping this under the rug." Geneva hesitated. "I want justice, but I'm not sure I'm ready for the media coverage. It's going to be a storm." Her mother's eyes shone with protective determination. "Don't worry about that, we'll do it right. Thompson won't get away with anything. Besides, the local NAACP chapter will want to hear this. They've been pushing for accountability in the police department for years." Geneva exhaled, the corners of her mouth forming a faint, exhausted grin. The small kitchen felt like a fortress of love and understanding, a stark counterpoint to the menacing world she'd faced just hours ago. At that moment, she realized that although the ordeal had been harrowing, she wasn't alone. She had her mother, her best friend, and a network of support that was ready to stand with her as she sought justice. After breakfast, Major Ward prepared to depart, offering Geneva a gentle hug before stepping onto the porch. The sunlight revealed the faint circles under Ward's eyes, a testament to her own sleepless night. "Just remember," Ward said softly, "take care of yourself. The psychological strain can be worse than the physical injuries." Geneva nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I will. Thank you for everything, Sam. You saved my life." Ward smiled, though her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "That's what family does." She gave a brief nod to Elaine and headed to her SUV, leaving behind an atmosphere of calm determination. Back inside, Elaine guided Geneva to the couch, insisting that she lie down. "You need some rest, baby. I'll handle whatever calls come in. You just take it easy." Geneva obliged, though sleep felt distant. She closed her eyes, replaying the night in her mind. The sequence of events flashed by in stark detail, the humiliating pat-down, the maniacal look in Thompson's eyes, the gun pointed at her chest. Despite the swirling memories, exhaustion finally claimed her. An hour or so passed in restless slumber, punctuated by vivid dreams where she was back at the barn, her father's old face superimposed over Thompson's. She jolted awake, heart pounding, only to find herself in the safety of her mother's living room. A wave of gratitude and sorrow washed over her. Determined not to let the trauma consume her, she sat up, rubbing her temple. Elaine, sensing her wakefulness, brought a cup of chamomile tea. "Your phone's been ringing," she said softly. "Some calls from the station, some from Fort Bragg, and a few from reporters. I told them you'd talk when you're ready." Geneva accepted the tea with a nod. "I'll need to speak to Fort Bragg soon, coordinate with the legal department, and I guess I'll have to deal with the press eventually." She sighed, realizing her exhaustion was more than physical. It was deeply emotional. But in that moment, sipping warm tea in the comfort of her childhood home, she felt a surge of resolve. The road ahead might be rocky, but she had the strength and the support to see it through. Days bled into a week, and the story of racist cop pulls over black woman, unaware she is a U.S. Colonel exploded across local media. The sensational headlines circulated through social media, accompanied by op-eds and public outcry. Civil rights activists demanded immediate accountability, while local officials scrambled to distance themselves from Thompson's actions. Geneva found herself in the eye of the media storm. Although she gave only one formal statement, the press dissected every word, painting her as both hero and victim. Her mother's phone rang incessantly with interview requests. A modest crowd of supporters sometimes gathered outside the house, carrying signs championing justice. It was a whirlwind Geneva had never wanted, but felt compelled to endure so that no other person would suffer what she did. Meanwhile, Thompson's case advanced with unusual speed. Investigative journalists dug up old complaints, old victims, painting a lurid portrait of a man who had been shielded by departmental loopholes and complacent superiors. Each revelation further tarnished the local police's reputation, fueling demands for a complete overhaul. Geneva, for her part, returned briefly to Fort Bragg, where she met with JAG officers, Judge Advocate General's Corps, to formalize her statement in a military capacity. She was reassured that the army would stand behind her, offering both legal and psychological support. "We protect our own," a JAG captain had said, shaking her hand firmly. "And we don't tolerate those who threaten our service members." Despite the official backing, Geneva felt the emotional toll weigh heavily. She suffered flashbacks and nightmares, often waking in a cold sweat, half expecting to find herself back in that barn with a gun pointed at her chest. Counseling sessions provided some relief, but she knew healing would take time. Still, a measure of solace came from the countless letters, emails, and social media messages from strangers thanking her for her bravery and apologizing for a system that let someone like Thompson wear a badge. One note in particular stood out. A young black girl from a nearby county wrote, "Because of you, I believe the law can still protect us if the right people wear the uniform." Reading that, Geneva felt her eyes well up. She clung to that hope. Maybe, just maybe, positive change could rise from the ashes of her ordeal. At last, the day of Thompson's bail hearing arrived. Geneva returned to Greenville, flanked by her mother, Major Ward, and a small group of supporters from the local NAACP. The courthouse steps were teeming with reporters, cameras, and spectators hoping to witness the next chapter of this high-profile drama. Geneva kept her chin high, her army uniform immaculately pressed, medals gleaming in the mid-morning sun. It was both a statement of her identity and a silent rebuke to the prejudice that nearly claimed her life. Inside, the corridors echoed with hushed voices as she made her way to the courtroom. When Thompson was led in, clad in an orange jumpsuit, his demeanor was subdued, his eyes avoiding hers. The once cocky swagger had been replaced by a withdrawn silence. Geneva felt an odd mixture of relief and simmering anger. Watching him in chains underscored the gravity of his actions, yet it also reopened the wounds of that night. Prosecutors listed the charges: kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, abuse of authority, and more. The judge listened, face impassive. Thompson's defense attorney pleaded for a lower bail, citing his family ties and the stress Thompson had been under. Geneva's hands tightened into fists on her lap. Her mother, seated beside her, squeezed her wrist gently to remind her she was not alone. The judge ultimately denied bail. The litany of evidence, combined with the strong likelihood Thompson might pose a danger or flee, sealed his fate. Geneva let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. As the bailiff escorted Thompson away, she caught a final glimpse of his face. He seemed lost, perhaps beginning to grasp the magnitude of his actions. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright light, reporters swarmed, their questions flying. Geneva politely deferred, repeating the same stance. "I trust the judicial process to run its course. I have faith that justice will be served." Then, flanked by her mother and ward, she made her way down the steps, ignoring the cacophony of flashing cameras. Each step felt like progress, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever encountered that brand of injustice. In the weeks following the bail hearing, the local police department initiated a sweeping internal review, spurred by the public outrage and scrutiny. Officers with questionable records were put on administrative leave, and an outside agency was brought in to audit past complaints. The press labeled it a reckoning, attributing much of the catalyst to the colonel's case. Geneva watched these developments from a careful distance, her focus split between her army duties and her personal healing. She spent more time with her mother, reconnecting with family in ways she'd neglected due to her busy service career. Sometimes she took long walks around her old neighborhood, pondering how life could change in a single, volatile encounter. As the internal review exposed corruption and complacency, the local police chief announced his retirement effective immediately. Several key officials who had previously dismissed complaints against Thompson resigned or were terminated. Each news update validated the deeper, systemic issues that had allowed Thompson's hateful behavior to fester. And with each change, Geneva felt a small weight lift from her shoulders, a sense that at least something good was being carved from her trauma. Meanwhile, she found pockets of joy with her mother. They cooked old family recipes, laughed at childhood memories, and watched sunsets on the back porch. Geneva realized that as horrifying as the ordeal had been, it had also given her a second chance to reconnect with Elaine. She promised herself that moving forward, she would not let duty overshadow family. Major Ward visited on weekends, often bearing updates about the pending trial. "They're stacking up witnesses, Jenny," she reported during one late afternoon visit. Former detainees, co-workers, folks who were afraid to speak up until now. "It's going to be a long trial, but the prosecutors are confident." Geneva nodded, relief mingling with apprehension. "I'll testify, too. The thought of facing him in court is nerve-wracking, but I'm ready." Ward reached over, giving her friend's hand a comforting pat. "We'll be right there with you. He'll have to face all of us this time." It was a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. The system was working to right its wrongs, but it came at the cost of near tragedy. Geneva knew the final chapter had yet to be written, but she felt steady on her feet, anchored by the unwavering support around her. The trial was scheduled for early autumn, and as the leaves turned golden, Geneva prepared herself emotionally and mentally. She rehearsed her testimony with the prosecuting attorney, ensuring every detail of that harrowing night was precise and clear. Some nights she still woke trembling, haunted by the memory of a gun pressed to her chest. But as the weeks passed, her determination solidified. The courthouse steps once again were lined with eager press on the trial's opening day. The proceedings unfolded with a stringent formality. The prosecution painted Thompson as a rogue officer driven by racial bias and a hunger for control. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting similar encounters where Thompson used intimidation or fabricated charges. Each testimony felt like a hammer blow of vindication, smashing the carefully maintained facade of a dedicated lawman that Thompson once peddled. Geneva's turn came mid-trial. Dressed in her uniform, she walked to the witness stand, heart pounding but posture unyielding. She recounted every detail, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. She refused to be intimidated by the defense attorney's attempts to twist her words or question her credibility. The presence of Major Ward, seated in the gallery, gave her courage. When the defense called Thompson to testify, a hush fell over the courtroom. He spoke with feigned remorse, claiming mental strain, marital woes, and departmental pressures. He even tried to insinuate that Geneva's defiance escalated the incident. But the prosecution dismantled his arguments by presenting the recorded dispatch calls, the fabricated charge of expired registration, and the glaring evidence of him ignoring a life-threatening crash. It left Thompson flustered and cornered. The final blow came when the jury listened to a trove of dashcam audio capturing Thompson's vitriolic language during routine stops. While the footage from that specific night was incomplete, the pattern of explicit racial harassment was crystal clear. In the still courtroom air, Thompson's hateful words echoed like the final toll of a bell, signifying the end of his deceit. After days of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for only a short time. They returned with a verdict of guilty on multiple counts, including kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and various civil rights violations. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the judge thanked the jury and scheduled a separate date for sentencing. Geneva closed her eyes, exhaling a massive breath she'd been holding for what felt like an eternity. Thompson slumped forward, face pale, knowing his future lay behind bars. There was no swagger left, no smirk, no trace of the arrogance that fueled his bigotry. He looked like a man who finally recognized the gravity of his actions, though empathy for him was hard to come by, given the life-threatening ordeal he had caused. Outside the courthouse, a large crowd had gathered. As Geneva emerged with Major Ward and her mother, cheers and applause erupted. Some people held signs that read, "Justice served," and "Stand with Colonel Wilson." She felt both humbled and overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. While it was heartwarming to be celebrated, she was acutely aware that many others, lacking her rank or visibility, had suffered injustice without such a resolution. Still, she smiled, shaking hands and offering words of gratitude. Major Ward gave her a playful nudge. "You did it, Colonel. You stared evil in the face and won." Geneva's eyes glistened with tears she could no longer hold back. "We did it," she corrected, glancing at her mother, her friend, and the sea of people who believed in accountability. No one person could have done this alone. Reporters clamored for sound bites, and Geneva spoke briefly. "This verdict isn't just a personal victory, it's a statement that prejudice and abuse of power have no place in our society. I'm grateful to the jury for seeing the truth and to everyone who supported me. May we continue to work for a system that truly protects and serves all citizens." With that, she turned away from the cameras, stepping down the courthouse steps. A crisp breeze rustled the banners in the crowd, as though whispering a promise of renewal. The final chapter of her ordeal was nearly complete, and in its wake, a path forward shone with cautious hope. The day of Thompson's sentencing arrived with subdued anticipation. Geneva chose not to attend in person, having already given her victim impact statement in writing. Instead, she stayed at her mother's house, quietly waiting for the news. Major Ward had gone to represent the Army's interest, and around midday, Geneva's phone buzzed. The sentence was harsh and unequivocal, a significant prison term, plus the permanent revocation of Thompson's right to serve in law enforcement. Geneva felt a profound sense of relief. Karmic justice, it seemed, had found its mark. He would no longer have the power to endanger others. The aftermath brought a strange stillness. There were no more court dates to attend, no more throngs of reporters at the door. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Geneva spent more time with her mother, relishing the joy of simple, everyday moments. She also returned to Fort Bragg, resuming her duties with renewed purpose. Her commanding officers praised her bravery, and she used her platform to advocate for fairness and accountability, both in the military and beyond. One evening, while cleaning out her old bedroom, she stumbled upon a faded family photo of her late father in uniform. Tears welled up as she remembered his integrity, his kindness, and the pride he felt in her achievements. She pressed the photo to her heart, reflecting on how proud he'd be that she stood up, not just for herself, but for those who couldn't. She realized that her journey, as traumatic as it had been, was also a testament to resilience. She had faced lethal hatred and lived to ensure it did not go unpunished. In doing so, she had become a beacon of hope, showing that even when the system falters, courage and truth can still prevail. That night, as she sat with her mother on the porch, fireflies dancing across the lawn, Geneva looked at the stars and felt an unspoken gratitude for the second chance at life she had been given. She intended to use it well to continue her service, to inspire change, and to prove that when darkness tries to overshadow what is right, the light of determination and unity can guide the way forward. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional and suspenseful journey. We've witnessed how a routine traffic stop, fueled by prejudice, nearly led to tragedy until courage, justice, and the unwavering support of true friends prevailed. This powerful story reminds us that standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem overwhelming, can truly make a difference. If you found this tale compelling, we encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps spread important messages about integrity, resilience, and the triumph of good over injustice. Let's continue shining a light on stories that inspire hope and encourage us all to make our communities safer, fairer, and better for everyone.